Welcome, Ruth. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin by asking you to paint a picture of what your lovely mum, Anna, was like.
Just being my mum, really, throughout my life, being there for me, 100% unconditional love. My support, my rock, my emotional support throughout my life. Just everything to me. She meant the world to me.
I think that's very obvious from the things that you've shared with me, just how close you were. From your childhood growing up in South Lanarkshire in Scotland, are there any memorable holidays or things that really stand out that you remember of your mum growing up?
We just used to go to local seaside holidays, and I've always got all the pictures, I suppose, that you can look back on. But I just always remember, no matter where I was with my mum, feeling safe, feeling happy. You can't replicate that feeling, and you weren't even necessarily aware of it at the time. But now that she's absent from your world, you're aware of not having that basic comforting feeling, happiness, safe in somebody's company.
How did she make you feel safe?
Because she was a really good advocate for me. She had my back, had a close bond, always fought my corner, always.
Can you think of an example of her sticking up for you as a child or as an adult, or fighting your corner?
Just in my childhood, any squabbles with other kids, she was out, she watched and made sure you were okay. Even just a supporting presence, obviously letting you make your own decisions, but a supporting presence, somebody you knew you could turn to, could talk to her about anything, really. And I just feel throughout her life we always had a close bond. I remember when I was a young child and she had to go into hospital, and I was there every day to see her. I got asked if I wanted to go to another child's birthday party, and there was no consideration whether I was going to go there, because I wanted to be and see my mum over that period she was in hospital. I didn't like being apart from her. When you were a child, she made you feel safe and secure and loved, and that's all you could ever ask for.
Was she quite a feisty character then, would you say?
Yes, she had a strong personality. She knew her own mind, was a good character, funny. She always stuck up for her family no matter what, but I think she could weigh things up quite well. And I think her advice that she gave me in an instant would make you feel better. So you'd always want to turn to your mum, because her advice instantly relieved any anxiety you might have had over a situation.
Brilliant. She sounds great. Was she funny? Did she have any catchphrases or turns of phrase that she would always use that might make you laugh? Or, how did she
was just overall, she had a good sense of humour. We used to laugh. She used to like, sitting out in the garden. She was simple life, really, sitting out in the garden, being with her family. She loved her pets. She loved her dogs. I always remember reading a comment that she'd written saying, "My idea of housework is a sweep around the room, a sweeping glance around the room," and just funny comments like that. She never got really upset about anything too much. She was always calm. I never ever she was never angry or outbursts, never like that. Always calm, always just accepted things, but tried to look at positives. So I think there was many good traits that I would like to say that I hope I've got from her, because she was a tough cookie. She was tough even when she was in her 90s. She was going down to the shops herself. She was 94 when she passed, but she used to go down to the shops every day.
Very mobile then.
She was very mobile. She had kind of clean living, never drank, never smoked, really just was there for her family, a family woman, family orientated, hated being stuck in the house. She didn't like it if she was stuck in, even if she was older, when it got icy weather and we used to say can't go out. She was obviously a wee bit stubborn that way, because she hated being stuck in. She liked to go out and about, loved walking, and that was right up until her 90s.
She had a brilliant attitude to life then.
Yes, an attitude that I would like to replicate when I think about it now. Yes, an acceptance about things that might happen in life, but just strength to get through it.
And your father?
My dad died when I was quite young, so she lost him I mean, I was in my 20s when she died. So she lived all those years without my dad. So a lot of the time it was just me, my mum and my sister. We're quite a small family. So I think just looking back on it, I had strong bonds to my mum. I always was close by to her, lived close to her, seen her most days, even when she was in the care home, because I had retired. So I was able to see her most days until obviously COVID struck.
Obviously, part of your sort of daily, weekly routine was always popping in to see your mum, was it?
Yeah, again, it was to get her out and about because she didn't like not having access to the community or getting out. So we used to go out different places together while she was in the care home.
What sort of places would you go?
Just to take her to the hairdressers. She liked getting her hair done. Even come to my house for lunch. We used to go to Prestwick. It was a kind of wee beach seaside town quite close by, but she loved it there. She liked going to Prestwick. We used to have an ice cream. I've got a picture of her, but I don't even know where it is. I took a picture of her with her ice cream and I've got that somewhere.
What flavour was it?
Vanilla flavour, as far as I remember. I'm trying to picture the photo in my head, but she loved it there, just walking up and down next to the seaside if the weather was nice. So she always looked forward to coming to getting out. She was a very, very, she didn't like to mix. So when she was in the care home, she very much stayed in her room. She didn't go into the lounge areas or anything. She was happy just watching her television in her room. She was quite a private person, so she wasn't comfortable in a communal setting. So I think there was those difficulties with her in the home as well. So
tell me about the run up to her having to go into a home. When did that happen?
I think if I'm thinking about it, I think she became a wee bit more forgetful. Just obviously by this point she was in her 90s and she had a fall, and it was really from that fall there was one thing happened after another. She had like a kind of sickness period where she was being sick and nobody knew what was wrong with her. And I don't know if that was to do with her digestion at all, because in all fairness, there was nothing, although she was in her 90s, there was nothing you could see she had any illnesses, or she had arthritis in her hands, in her legs sometimes, but there was nothing else, no other ailments that you could say she had. And her legs used to get swollen and different things. And it came to the point where overnight, she wasn't able to recall things. She was repeating actions. And I think at the time, they didn't do a proper diagnosis for dementia, but they put it down to dementia. And it was very, very difficult at home because by that time she'd become quite not good on her feet. She was having a lot of falls at home and in her house. It was a worry leaving her, and especially overnights and things like that. And at one point it was difficult for her to get up and down the stairs, but it was the forgetfulness was a worry. So she was diagnosed as having dementia, although they didn't do the full tests on her. They said it would be too distressing for her. But then over time, the condition improved. She was always aware of us and knew us, and you could still chat to her. She still laughed at things, still had her sense of humour, but I think that her confusion improved. So that very much when she was in the care home, we did see an improvement initially when she went into care home.
And you mentioned that she liked music.
It was just some songs that she had mentioned that she enjoyed. She liked listening kind of operatic music. It's two songs that I mentioned in particular that make us remember my mum: the Riders in the Storm, the Doors, and the Penny Arcade. She always said that song cheered her up. It was a Roy Orbison song.
They're quite different songs, aren't they?
They're both different songs, and I think for different ways I can relate to my mum with them. And I think the words in Riders in the Storm I can relate to in a way, and also the Penny Arcade one was just a nice song that she she said if she listened to it, it always cheered her up.
How do you relate to the Penny Arcade lyric?
It's difficult for me to listen to these songs, very difficult. I'd get up listening to them now.
Too painful.
I feel like any memories now is too painful for my mum to think about. Although I'm talking to you just now, just in everyday life, if I want to try and find a memory or think of her, it's just her lasting days that come to mind, unfortunately. And the circumstances of what happened to her, that's the only thing, that's the overriding thing, which is upsetting in itself.
Tell me, when was she admitted to the care home?
It was 2017. She went into the care home, and that was like kind of following her fall. All came off that. She was in hospital first. So initially, I think she went into a different care home, and she ended up transferring to Meldrum Gardens because they had a space. So we were quite happy there because we saw online it had a good reputation, that people spoke highly of it, and it was a nice environment. The room was nice, but obviously there was issues along the way with that care home and through lockdown especially.
So she was in the care home for, say, 3 years before the pandemic began?
Yes.
So talk us through then what happened. So she was happy enough where she was?
She wouldn't have chosen to be there. I think she understood that she was there for some element of care. She was a private person, so having almost strange people tending to her was very difficult for her, was against her, how she felt about things. So that's one of the reasons I used to take her out each day. On a daily basis, we used to go out and about. So it was just in the evenings she would be there watching her TV. There was a lot of difficulties because I think a lot of the time they maybe expect you or think it's valuable for you to mix with other residents. And I think some people that is true, but not in my mum's case, because she'd always been extremely private throughout her whole life. So it was really only family that she invited into her home, and that was just the way she was. She didn't, for instance, have people popping in or out. She was happy either in her own company or with her friends or with her family.
Fair enough.
So it was difficult for her to say that was her choice.
But she understood.
I think she understood. I've got a young child, a son, so I used to see my mum when he was at school, and for me to manage both at the time, I felt that was a compromise that we done. And to get a sleep at night, because my mum, if she was getting up at night, I think she would maybe sometimes have needed assistance or help, because I've got stairs going up to toilet. So that was what we felt was a kind of nice balance for my mum. She was still getting out and about and seeing me and family, but at night in the evening she was in the care home.
So let's go back to just before the pandemic. How were things then?
Obviously I was still visiting daily, most days, to my mum. Eventually I was initially going every day, and then I kind of made it every other day, and she really looked forward to visits from family. But when we weren't there, she was just content sitting in her room watching TV, because essentially that's what she did at home. She used to go to her shops and then watch TV, just simple life, happy doing that in with her world. So it was just the same right up to COVID. And then I remember the care home said, we'll allow you in. And we knew this was going to be our last visit for a wee while. You had to put on your mask, and that was in March.
Are you worried at that point about her and the virus?
I was. Well, at the time there wasn't much. I didn't know much about it. I didn't envisage the length that would be carrying on for. I handed in my son's computer, and I'd set Skype up in it so that I was able to, didn't need to rely on. The care home had an iPad tablet, I believe, but I handed in a computer so that I could have a chats to my mum, but I didn't envisage enforced separation for a period of 8 months. I remember asking for a window visit and told it wasn't possible, because where my mum's room was, you couldn't access the window without going through the care home.
So you didn't see your mum for 8 months from...
I saw her through Skype, and then in June I wrote a letter to the home and said, is there any chance I can come and see my mum through the window? And at that point I learned that other residents had been having window visits through the lounge area, and our family had been completely unaware of it for those months between March and June.
How awful.
We were missed out of whatever communication, but what I find difficult is nobody even said to me. And they knew that I'd saw my mum every day, and nobody commented or said, none of the staff, why have you not attended? So that was deeply distressing, yeah, and that's started issues with trust.
When you were communicating with your mum over the computer, how were you communicating?
It was exceptionally difficult because she had digital hearing aids, but that was one of the issues. The care home weren't maintaining her hearing aids. They weren't even in her ears. So I used to have to contact them and say, I don't think her hearing aids are in. Can you check the batteries? And that went on throughout the whole of lockdown.
What platform were you speaking?
It's Skype. It was Skype.
So Skype. So you could see her, and she was able.
I could see her.
She was able to answer your call, and you.
Yes. Well, the care homes used to connect the calls for us.
Right, so you would tell them, I'm phoning now, can you please?
We had an agreed time because it was difficult every time I phoned, it was difficult to arrange. So I ended up an agreed time at 2:00, and they tried to do that.
So if you had not brought in the computer for those months until June, you would not have seen your mum at all because you weren't aware of the window visits.
I was unaware of the visits until June.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at the very least, at least you were able to see her.
I was able to see her through Skype. Sometimes I have to just write down things so she could read it because it was difficult. Obviously, it's difficult for my mum for her hearing, but at times she didn't even have a hearing aid. So it was very difficult for her to. But just the fact that you're seeing her meant a lot to me because then you could check in on her, really.
She must have been really happy to see you when you called.
Yeah, we used to have a Skype call between 2 and 3, and that was when my wee boy came home from school at 3. So it used to more or less be an hour each day. And it's sad because the care home would sometimes left the computer out, and she used to try calling me on her own. Sorry.
After the call
distressing. It's distressing to think she's trying to press the keys on the keyboard to contact me on her own.
And did she manage to do that?
No, because it was just, we used to always get cut off a lot of the time, and they said it was the Wi-Fi. But then the Blake said that my mum was messing with the settings on the computer because she was pressing the keys when the calls had finished. But that's when I'd asked them to put the computer away when the calls weren't in use. But then that's caused another, because she used to think they were trying to steal the computer as well. She used to say, they're taking my computer away.
That was her lifeline, obviously, her link to her loved ones. And when you challenged the care home about why you didn't know about the window visits, what did they say to you?
They said that they mentioned a member of staff, and they said they told you. And I said, no, they didn't tell me. If I would have known, I would have been there because I was off my work. I had no issues with being able to go down to the care home. It was basically a 5-minute drive away from me. My sister didn't know about it either. So other family emails, which we didn't receive, that I later found out. So I don't know how I don't know how the information about the visits were given to the other residents' families. I don't know if it was sent out by email or just word of mouth, but it was only when I asked for that, I wrote a letter actually. It was only then I was told. But then after that, because I used to go and see my mum 2 or 3 times a week at the window, but then they changed the conditions where one person 30 minutes once a week. So not long after that it changed to that. So we actually received an email saying they were putting other provisions in place, but it became less because I was only allowed to come once after that for 30 minutes.
How were those window visits? Hard,
because it was through a window and you were still told to wear a mask. So it was difficult for my mum to read what I'm speaking if she's hard of hearing.
So you were outside the home?
Yes.
You were still wearing a mask?
Yes.
And you were told to do that, were you? Or?
Yes, the care home told me we still had to wear a mask.
So it's not that she could work out what you were saying?
It was extremely difficult, and it was hard because it was hard leaving.
Did she understand all these restrictions? Did she understand the virus?
I think she maybe understood them at times, but then there was times she would maybe have forgotten about it.
Sure.
Or not aware, and not fully understanding why I wasn't taking her out, because she looked longingly at the outside, because as I said, she didn't like being stuck in. I remember once making a comment that I was going to walk with my friend later that day, and she said, "Can I not come?" So she, in that sense, didn't understand why she wouldn't be able to accompany me. At times she did understand that there was a risk of infection. I think she had some of an understanding, but not fully.
So hard for you, and so hard for her.
Yes.
My word. So when you were at the window, were you able to sort of, touch hands through the window, or communication with your eyes? Were you able to see at least how did she look? Did she seem okay?
Both, I could see obviously how she was. We would do wee love heart signs. She was losing weight. I know that. I could see, but it was difficult because she always had her big coat on, which is a big kind of puffer coat that I had given her. And so it was difficult to see, but she was having problems, her leg problems resurfaced during that period as well. I feel it was very difficult to access some information. It was difficult, really extremely difficult time. But I could see that she had lost weight. I remember one of the ladies saying, "Oh, your mum's went downhill." So I could see in her face she'd lost weight. And I used to she needed encouragement and prompting a lot of the time to eat her meals. And a lot of the time they would delay my call because they'd say, "Your mum's still eating her meal." And I kept saying, "Look, I encourage her to eat. So can we not still have a Zoom call despite the fact she's not finished her meal?" The meals were served at 12:30 in the day, and my Zoom call was 2. So it's just later on I keep thinking she wasn't getting that prompting. There was a few upsets throughout that period where I could see she was extremely upset. So there was a few things that happened as well. So it was really difficult. She didn't show. That was one of the things. She protected me from a lot. So she didn't show me her upset, but there was a few times I knew she was angry and upset about a few things that had occurred. So it was difficult because you couldn't get to her.
Yeah, that must have just been tremendously hard, just the lack of access and the inability to make things right. I can't imagine.
It is extremely, frustrating is not the word, but I think I've got reams of emails to the care home about her hearing aids and just meals, food taken, because she was upset one day because they'd taken food away from her. I'd phoned up and they said it's because it's spoiled in the heat. They're saying at the time my mum was so upset that she had refused any care. She'd sat in her chair all night. And that was how bad she felt, because she was really tough-minded. And
so she was protesting?
I think she was protesting. And it was food being removed from her. But she lost weight all through lockdown, and it was me that had to contact the dietitian. And it was only at that stage, after I contacted the dietitian, she did gain a wee bit of weight, and that was in October. Okay, and that's when the care home had a COVID outbreak.
So were you able to get her some supplements to...
the dietitian did prescribe supplement drinks for her. She didn't even, I don't think she actually got the benefit from them, although she had gained weight. She gained weight before she got the benefit of her supplement drinks.
But at least you were able to get a dietitian. That must have been a comfort to know that you were helping her.
Yes.
So from the time of the outbreak, you were having these daily Skype calls, and then from June you had your half-hour window visit, as it was called, and then there was an outbreak in the home in the October of 2020, an outbreak of COVID. How did you learn about that?
I received a phone call because it was on the Sunday that I was supposed to be visiting, on the 11th of October, saying that there was no visits. And that was the first time I'd been told. I mean, a lot of the time the visits were cancelled for one reason or another, the window visits, but this is the first time I'd been told there was a COVID outbreak in the care home. So everything was cancelled. So I couldn't get in to see her or get to do my visit.
Had you been into the home at all?
I was never allowed, and it was always pushed away because of infection rates and different things happening. So very limited window visits as well. I mean, over the June period when I found out, I was managing to get there 2-3 times a week, but then it changed to just one visitor. So after about July time, that's when it changed. So it was only one visit. So I didn't get much benefit from the flexibility that they'd had before. But then when we heard about the care home lockdown, that was obviously the visits finished then. And that was it. I never ever got another window visit.
How are you feeling when you heard there was an outbreak of COVID in the home?
I was frightened. I think at the time I still thought my mum, and I look back in it now and wonder how I thought that, but I still felt she was a wee bit protected in the care home because I was aware that they had restrictions put in place and that nobody was getting in or out of the care home. But that's what I believed at least. But it's only later on I've realised that wasn't necessarily the case. And at the time they wouldn't give me any information. I remember asking, has my mum had been exposed? Is it a member of staff? Is it a resident? Because there was 4 different units in the care home, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. So I didn't know any information. I didn't know if it was in my mum's unit or if it was in another unit. And it was just waiting, really, each day waiting to hear, because obviously you knew she was going to be getting tested.
And talk me through what happened. I mean, this series of the podcast focused on the fact that many COVID bereaved have a sense of surrealness or unrealness about the loss of the loved one, and that's down to the fact that so many of normal death rituals that happen were denied. So, having a goodbye with your loved one, dressing their body before burial, a funeral, a memorial, all of these things just did not happen. And so that sort of complicated the grief, and people have been unable to close the circle of grief, as it were. I know that you had a tremendously hard time, and you feel to this day tortured by the things that happened. If you're able to share with us what happened to your mum.
Yeah, I do. I have to say I feel I'm traumatised by the circumstances, and the circumstances make it so much worse because the way things were handled have left family just no way of fixing it. Actually tortured, because I didn't know, obviously, with my mum, she was actually showing signs of illness in October that I only found out through my mum's medical notes, but she wasn't tested she wasn't tested again in October. And it was only in November that I realised there was just something, definitely, it was such a sudden deterioration. I was aware that my mum wasn't eating, and that week, starting the 9th of November, her appearance, and she actually said to me, I'm not feeling well, and she got quite distressed, and she would have protected me at all costs from worry. And I remember the nurse saying to me, well, let's have a laugh, because she was trying to cheer the situation up, but her appearance online was dreadful. She wasn't well. She kept drooping. She fell asleep shortly into the call. And that's when I first raised the alarm, because I knew something wrong with my mum. Phoned the doctor.
It sounds like she had fatigue, that she was extremely tired,
She was really drowsy, or grey pallor. I found out it was her medication. It was all running down her chin. I was on a Skype call and I said, what's wrong with my mum? And they said, she can't swallow. We've taken 20 minutes today to try and get her to swallow her medication, which was unusual because I used to leave her to take her own medication. And again, as I said, she hadn't been eating for like the week prior. And they were saying that we think she's not eating because she's in pain. She was complaining of pain as well. So it was actually myself that phoned the doctor. And when I re-listened to my call, in a bit of a state, because I'm saying I think my mum's dying, but the care home didn't share the same concerns about my mum.
What did they say?
They said it's nothing acute, and they said that they didn't think that, because I'd shared end of life, it wasn't going to be, they didn't think it was anything that was going to happen. I can't even remember the wordings, but they definitely, because it's written on my mum's medical notes, nothing that they didn't think my mum was going to be dying. So that was difficult, because I feel things were just horrendous at that point, and I just knew, I felt my mum's dying. And I think that was on the Wednesday. I think it was a Friday. The doctor did go out. Initially there was a nurse sent out, and it was only later on I get told the nurse get turned, but the nurse didn't get access to my mum. I don't know why. She never got access in to see my mum. I've not got to the bottom of it, but the doctor went out, and the doctor spoke to me on the Friday saying everything was fine. And she had picked up a wee bit on the Friday, but still extremely drowsy, still drooping. So I think it was just that I couldn't be there. And I think I was a wee bit in shock about seeing my mum the way she was. But the doctor reassured me on the Friday and said just basically that she had no concerns. The relief was, I remember going to swing park with my son, and the relief I felt, but that only lasted for 48 hours, because my mum was dead on the Sunday. The only routine tests were carried out in my mum's unit, and I think 5 residents were positive.
And this doctor mother in person?
Yes, she'd attended, because the nurse had not got in. She attended in person, yes.
So you were sort of lulled into a false sense of security then, really?
I felt my mum was okay, and she had been a wee bit more chatty, but when I think about it now, the things she was saying were a bit strange. But I had just thought she was talking a wee bit more, because the 2 days prior she was just drooping, couldn't speak, wasn't speaking. But on Friday she spoke a wee bit. And I thought, oh, whatever it is, she's getting over it.
Last conversation with her? On
the day she died, but it wasn't a conversation. So the last conversation was on the Friday, the 13th. Very short one, because our Zoom call got cut off that day.
So you were in the swing park with your son. You were feeling relieved that been told she's fine, and she seemed a little bit better. Then what?
Then on the Saturday morning, I got a call from the care home saying, no, in fact, that Saturday I didn't hear anything, and I didn't get a Zoom call. And I received word on the Saturday that my mum's test was positive for COVID. I was distraught, because, as I said, the care home hadn't said there was any. They'd only told me on the 11th, after I'd raised concern, that a staff member had tested positive, but the residents were all just tested routinely as a precaution. So I was traumatised, and to this day I never followed up my Zoom call that day, because I felt I couldn't speak to my mum, because I felt so upset, and I thought I'm going to fall apart. So I didn't chase it up, and I just kept phoning that day to try and find out how she was in the care home. I was just told basically poor diet. That's what I was told. And then phoned at midnight, poor diet, but she's sleeping. And then the Sunday morning I get told about low oxygen levels. And what did I want to do? I just remember thinking, I don't know what I wanted to do. I just obviously wanted the best care for my mum. They were giving us reassurance throughout that day, saying our oxygen levels have returned to 95. She's not distressed. She's not uncomfortable. So I got a call inviting me for a visit, and obviously I ran to the care home. I don't know what I was expecting, but when I got there, my mum was horrendous. The immediate feeling I had was she's dying, and they said to me, you can only stay for 10 minutes. And I think my mum wasn't able to move or speak to me. She was breathing loudly, short, loud gasps through her mouth, and just actually thinking now when I look back, she was trying to reach out to me with her hand. She had a movement with her hand. A couple of times she tried to kind of grunt as if she was trying to speak to me. But I think I don't know if I was in shock, but I was trying to reassure her, but I wasn't allowed to approach her. And when it was time to leave, I remember the girls saying to Mum, it's time to say goodbye to Ruth. And I said, it's not goodbye. And my mum managed to say no, which must have taken her effort, real effort. So the fact that I left, because they said to me, I remember leaving saying, I'll promise I'll be back, because I'd spoken to the manager, and I said, is my mum going, we're not there yet. They were really giving me hope that everything was going to be okay. They said, if she brightens up, we'll do a Skype call. That's the words they said to me. this is all part of COVID. It's all part and parcel of it. So I went home, and to this day, that's my one big regret. I don't know if I'd have been able to stay or dug my heels in, but I feel I didn't fight. So that's a regret. It's hard to forgive myself for that.
And there was somebody in the room with you the whole time for those 10 minutes?
Yes. The carer was there standing with me. And I remember asking them, can I touch my mum's hand? And now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm thinking, why did I let them dictate? I just basically followed what they said, didn't question it. I keep thinking back, why? So that's hard. And it was only hours later that I got the call. But actually, we got a call to say, can you quickly come to the care home?
The same day?
Hours later. And so I had to arrange care for my son, but we got there really quite quickly. We got the call at 7:45, and when we arrived, they said, your mum's died. So we thought we were going to be with her, to support her. So that was taken away from us. And I think back on it now, and actually I found out later on that she died at 6:00. So it was like almost 2 hours before we were contacted. And it was hard getting in to see your mum the way she was, because I think like rigor mortis had set in, her mouth was wide open and she didn't look at peace. So that's been hard. And obviously after that, I went home to my house. My friend looked after my son that night, so I was in my house on my own. I spoke to my sister on the phone, but because of the rules of COVID, I was on my own here. Really hard as well, because you didn't have support.
So when they phoned you the second time, you thought you were going in to see her?
Yes, they said, if you've got to be here, get here as quickly as possible.
She had already passed?
Because my sister's husband was a shielding, so she was concerned about her husband, so she actually went away to stay with his sister, because my sister knew she was coming into a room exposed to COVID. But really, when she looks back on it now, all that was unnecessary, because my mum had died. It was past the time that we could have been of any use to her or any support to her. We went there thinking we were going to be with my mum and support her and help her, emotional support. But to have that taken away, and for me to have just left a matter of hours earlier, that's something I have to try and live with.
I can't get over the fact that in the second call, they didn't let on that your mum had passed.
Well, what they said was, it's too dangerous to tell you that somebody's died in case you crash your car. I think it's more dangerous to have us rushing down immediately somewhere.
That's very peculiar.
So that was a reason they gave for not telling, not indicating at the time.
And what's your feeling about that, really?
My feelings with the home now are, obviously I've found out a lot of things since then, and I'm distraught by the information I've learned, the things I've learned. No transparency, no answers from the care home. Everything's data protection. I've had to go through freedom of information requests to get little bits of information, but I've managed to paint a pretty good picture of what's occurred. But again, that's been another part of the trauma, going through the complaints procedures.
What did you get through freedom of information? What was the most?
I got freedom of information at information sent, just doing various requests, contacting different agencies to try and find out what happened. Because obviously my mum, they've written in her death certificate that she had 2 days illness, which I disagree with, because I could see my mum was ill before that. I feel it's pretty well documented, but again, it's like a difficult fight through the organisations that are involved with the care sector. That's been extremely difficult. So going through that, I'm still dealing with 2 years down the line. So I don't feel I've had a chance to, apart from the circumstances, you don't have a chance to grieve. None of it's normal. Information that for some part of closure is denied you. So you're not able to get any closure. I've obviously been dealing with trying to get answers. I've had to listen to the emergency calls. So that in itself has been extremely difficult, but I feel it's the only thing I can do for my mum now. But that's been difficult. It's been an ongoing thing for like 2 years now. We've been given different times when my mum's death was certified by the nurse. And it just, when you wonder about the protocols that have been carried out at that time, if they've been carried out correctly. In March 2020, just when all this was starting, we received a call from my mum's surgery And the nurse, we thought she was talking about the DNR resuscitation orders. And at the time, they'd said about trying to avoid hospital admission. Anybody over 80, they were trying to avoid that because of the risks of contracting COVID. And at the time, my response, and I've got the recording of the calls, I said, if my mum needs hospital, she needs hospital, irrespective of COVID. And it was only later on, when I've received my mum's medical notes and I was inquiring into things, that there was a key information summary saying not for admission, preferred place of death, care home, preferred place of care home. And we thought we didn't agree to that. And again, that's one of the issues that have never been addressed. And actually, I've got a paramedic. My mum she was in breathing difficulties and low oxygen levels, and she wasn't categorised as a high risk call. It was a low level call. And even that, on that day, they didn't attend before my mum died, but even they didn't attend within the average waiting times for that day. It was like over 3 hours, and my mum had died by then. And the ambulance paramedic notes have mentioned family not wanting their mum admitted to hospital. And when I had an interview with the ambulance services, they said that would have impacted, that key information summary would have impacted on whether my mum was categorised as a priority call or a low level call. And that's not something that we agreed ever. But when we've tried to take it up with the GP services, saying it was entirely appropriate for them to raise hospital admission given the risk of COVID infections and things like that. And my mum had COVID, so there was no risk to her getting COVID again at the hospital. But it's just all kind of brushed away like that. It's never really been addressed.
You said your mum didn't receive palliative care?
She didn't receive any care, any palliative care or medication or oxygen, and just for her to be left in her room and just sitting. Because when I got there, she had like bare feet, sitting in a chair, not even in her bed. I don't want it to be, but it's my lasting vision of. It's like an intrusive thought, so you can't avoid them entering your mind. It pops up when you're thinking of your mum. That's the one that's popping up, and she wouldn't like to think that.
Do you think they took that approach because of her age?
I think obviously she was 94, so someone with 94, but I just can't understand how basic human, to leave somebody with nothing to die on their own.
Amazing.
I don't think how that can be classed as any, not even with any. If my mum had received even palliative care, I think that would have made me feel better, because you don't want to think your mum's struggling with it to breathe on her own, with no one there to hold her hand. What happened to her? You wouldn't treat anybody or any living animal or person like that. You just wouldn't. So I think the fact that they phoned us up in March, I didn't know the result of that call. Had I known when I was speaking to the nurse at that point, but certainly family would never agreed that my mum wouldn't be admitted to hospital. And the reason they gave was if there was any need for hospital admission, the surgery would always contact family anyway. But obviously this happened over a weekend when the surgery's closed. The doctor last saw my mum on the Friday evening, and obviously they would know this key information summary is available to other health services to look at if the need arises to ascertain any plan that's been put in place. So they must have known that they would refer to, which you're arguing with a brick wall really to try and get them to see your point. I think it's purposefully swept under the carpet. So that's something else that we've never got to the bottom of, despite having all the paperwork for it, not something that they're actually taking on board or even investigating. So it's that lack of acknowledgement. I keep going back to that, but why they would have a contact family, because I remember thinking at the time that's quite insensitive to phone us about resuscitation. I thought it was about resuscitation, the call. It's obviously our words have been disregarded because it specifies things that family have never agreed to or consented to it, and that's what makes it difficult as well, because it's as if they're putting the blame on you for saying you don't want your mum hospitalised. And there's a comment actually with the doctor in the COVID hub saying family keep changing their mind, and I didn't know what it referred to because I was speaking to her asking about hospital. So she must have read this key information summary, but she said my mum's condition didn't, she was no worse from 2 days previous and her oxygen levels seemed fine. So the doctor was just to reattend on the Monday. And it's all based on all the inaccurate information, the information that was shared with the doctor as well, all part of it. So it's extremely difficult reading all that and saying how was my mum not any worse from the Friday to the Sunday, because I obviously spoke to her on the Friday and I seen her on the Sunday, and she was worse. So it's just all why it would minimising things. Like actually there's a comment in a report saying that my mum's breathing was normal at 6:30, but then they found her dead at 7. And I'm thinking that's because the emergency calls are before that. And actually in the same emergency call, the same carer is inconsistent about my mum's breathing. She's saying that my mum's breathing's normal, and then she's asked the question again and she said she's just making blowing noises. But originally, like 2 minutes before that, she'd said that my mum's breathing was normal. So it's like all these factors that you're thinking, how can the same carer say my mum's breathing is normal when she's making blowing noises? That's part of it as well, I think. That helps paint a picture of what your mum was going through, and you weren't there for her. And I think the care home were out their depth, and even the phone calls to all the emergency service, none of them were made in her presence. So mum never even had an opportunity to let them hear her. So even they're phoning and answering questions, but my mum's there in an office and my mum's in a room on her own. I just find it difficult to say, why can they not phone her with my mum and let the doctor hear my mum? Either if she wasn't able to speak, listen to her breathing. But that was even taken away from her. So it's just treated the way she was treated, like not part of she was a human being. She was loved. She was treasured by us. And all this was going on really, and we were unaware. So that's just all part and parcel of the haunted thoughts that you have about your mum, my mum.
Through.
Yes.
How are you managing to cope? Is there anything that helps with those really strong feelings? Is there anything you turn to feel just a little bit better than you do? Is there anything that's helped?
I think I'm not even ready to face a lot of them. They do come to the surface every now and again, and things do trigger them. It could be a passing comment, it could be something on television, it could just be a thought that returns to your head. It's always there, really. Just sometimes it comes out to the surface more than others. I don't think I'm ready to face it yet, because I'll avoid a lot of feelings. And to this day, I'll take my iPad to bed with me, because if I wake up during the night, to stop myself thinking, I'll just watch something on the iPad, and that's avoiding. So I don't feel I'm even ready to. Sometimes you can't avoid it, and those are bad days. But other days you'll just like trying to get by each day at a time. And obviously I have to be there for my son. So I just can't believe what's happened. It's difficult to process. And I know COVID was an extremely difficult time for everybody. I know the care sector struggled, but it's just not having been denied information about your mum's death, because I couldn't be with her, and just not being able to have that closure, and just the information you're given doesn't even, it's a lot of discrepancies and errors. In my mum's case, was a lot of wrong information was passed to the health services. But just the thoughts of your mum struggling with her last breaths and you're not there. I'd actually sent an email to the home on the Saturday night saying, I need please, if there's, because it was difficult to access and contact somebody in the home. Obviously they're busy. I thought I'll put it in writing, somebody will read it. And I asked, please, can you contact me? I need to be there for my mum. I couldn't bear it if something happened to her and I wasn't there. And that was an email I wrote on the Saturday night. And it's just your worst fears, the worst things have happened and you can't change it. And I feel almost as if it's broken the bond with me and my mum.
My words, that's strong. Have you tried counselling or spoken to any bereavement services? Or
yes, I have, and it's been helpful to discuss. Obviously talking will maybe help offload it for a wee while, but it's not something that resolves or takes away. And I think over time maybe there is a slight movement in the feelings, the strength of them when they hit you, but not a great deal. It's something that I know is going to part of my life now. Just the regrets and the guilt as well. And I just feel I should have listened to myself and not listened to the care home, listening to them and let my mum down. So it's so hard to try and accept those things going ahead. It's really painful, unbearably painful. So it's something that's going to be part of me now.
The home, it sounds like they have a lot to answer for, really. Do you plan to take any action about that? Or
I've been trying, obviously, to contact through the care home as a local authority, and I've went through the care inspectorate and the ombudsman as well, with no real success. It's been quite shocking, the responses that I've been receiving back. There's a lot of unanswered questions. I keep thinking back to when my mum was displaying illness in October, why she wasn't tested then. That was during the COVID outbreak and she was displaying signs of illness on the 16th of October. I don't understand why she wasn't tested then. I was also told by public health, for instance, that the last staff member to test positive was the 28th of October. But obviously that's inconsistent with what the care home is telling me. They said that a staff member had only been told by Locate Trace that they were a contact of a COVID positive case on the 11th, but the care home told me that that person had tested positive. So it's all these things as well that you become almost obsessed with trying to get answers so that you can understand, because it's difficult to just move away and move on and disregard all these things, but really it's hard.
It's very difficult for you to get to the truth.
Yes.
You know, all of these layers of bureaucracy with different stories are exacerbating that important quest that you need, and obviously preventing you from trying to come to terms with what's happened. Very, very difficult.
Yes, we're denied even that, which has resulted in me having to listen to emergency calls, 999 calls about my mum. And it's just like the way things were done. And then I can see that there was the care home were kind of out with what they were able to deal with. I can clearly see that, but that doesn't take away basic care, basic human needs to because my mum unfortunately, she didn't access any medical care or palliative care before her death, and she was alone. So these things are just unbearable, and that's the images when I think of my mum that come into my head, rather than the person she was and what she meant, who she was. It's just her death, and obviously she's more than what her death was, but that's the only things that are.
You've not been able to celebrate your mum in any way, or able to do any of that?
No, and at the funeral, obviously it was only 10 people who were allowed to go there, so I don't even feel, and when you went to funeral parlour, it was a closed coffin, and it's just because that's my mum, and it's just if you feel as if you're involved in what's happened to her, as if you're part of it, and it was the last thing you would ever consider, not being there for your mum when she needs you. And that in itself is just haunting, really. It's haunting.
Is there anything that you're grateful for?
I'm grateful for my mum, grateful for the time I had with her.
She had a long life.
She had a long life, yes, she did. But just the ending seems to have just taken over all the aspects of her life. At the moment, anyway, I'm hoping that as time goes in, might help, might be less all about her death. But obviously the process I'm going through just now, it's very much at my forefront, my head, and maybe once that's dealt with, because I feel I have to go through that process as well. So it's something else I feel I have to do.
That's understandable. Well, hopefully, you will be able to get to the truth, and then that might enable you to, I wouldn't say close the circle of grief, but at least to try and come to terms with what's gone on. That would enable you to heal a little.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the truth that you want, or do you want to, take an action against the care home?
I think it's what I need to hear is I'm sorry, or we didn't always get things right, an acknowledgement of what's happened, our feelings, how we're left, what we're left with is horrendous. But there's never been any of that. I mean, I know that they did uphold some care aspects, but there's never been any acknowledgement or apology to the feelings, to any of the feelings that are crucial with my mum's care from her illness from COVID. In fact, it's like the opposite has been true, and not acknowledging that my mum was ill or not noticing that she was ill, and which I find extremely difficult to understand. So it's just those things you would like have acknowledgement of, and that's not happened.
I think your mum would be pleased you're fighting this corner.
Oh, very much so. I don't know where I found the strength, to be honest, because I'm almost at a point now where it's difficult. It's very difficult reading when you receive the reports back, and you really have to brace yourself now to receive them. And any time I receive a response, it takes me days to actually read it before I can prepare myself for it, because I know it's going to be hurtful, the content now. Whereas I started this process thinking I'll get answers, and now I've realised, no, that's probably not going to happen. So it's that, like, you've got no redress, but I still feel strongly about following through the process to the end. Nevertheless, even though it's causing added pain.
If you're able to sum up your mum's legacy?
Just a wonderful person, mother, family person, always there for her family, always tried her best, just kind, thoughtful, considerate. I've mentioned it. She would never, I feel it's a negative now, but she never used to share problems. She protected her family from problems. So I remember once she fell down the stairs and it was an artery had burst in her leg, and she was bleeding heavily, and the ambulance said, well, who will we contact? And she said, I'm not wakening up my daughters in the middle of the night. And that was very much how she was for you.
Yeah. Oh, she sounds wonderful. You're a credit to her and the fight that you're putting up just to get to the truth. I'm sure she'd behind you in that, but also
thank you.
She would hope that, and the time will come that you'll, as hard as it is, be accepting of what's happened, be able to celebrate her, because she sounds absolutely gorgeous.
She was, and I'm lucky to have had such a supportive mother. That's what makes it hard, because you feel you've not done, although I tried throughout my life to be there for her, in a sense, it feels like it's all been eroded away because the last few days of her life not being there.
You were a great companion to her.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
It's such a lovely, close relationship you had.
Yes. And I'm sorry for getting upset whilst I was speaking to you. I thought I would be able to keep it together. So
hard. It's it's a complicated, traumatic grief. The great thing about this interview and others like it is that, it's helping you, but it will help other people who will listen and are in a similar position, because it's a shared grief, very unique type of grief, unfortunately. And, thank goodness that you are speaking out and that others are doing something similar, because it can only help.
Yes, I'm a great believer in talking and discussing things and having things out in the open and sharing, because it helps other people suffering similar grief.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
That wasn't easy. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening. Please do subscribe and review the podcast if you get a minute. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so via the show notes. The price of a coffee would be fantastic. And also please do follow Stolen Goodbyes on Twitter at RiseKMC and under Stolen Goodbyes on Facebook and Instagram. If you'd like to participate, you can email at stolengoodbyes@gmail.com or visit my website www.karen-rice.com. Good luck.